The distress signal had been screaming across subspace for 6 hours when the TCS Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Corvith mining colony. Admiral Marcus Okonkwo studied the tactical display from his command chair, watching 18 enemy vessels, sleek, predatory shapes, tear into the station's defensive grid. The Corvith had broadcast their SOS on every frequency, desperate, pleading. Humanity had answered. Just not the way they'd expected. "Sir, receiving transmission from the station," Ensign Torres reported, her fingers dancing across her console. They're demanding to know why we sent a warship." Okonkwo allowed himself a thin smile. "Tell them it's the only kind of ship we have." That wasn't entirely true, but close enough. When humanity had clawed its way into the stars 30 years ago, they'd learned fast that the galaxy didn't care about exploration vessels or scientific cruisers. Every ship that left Sol system carried enough firepower to crack a moon. The Retribution just carried more than most, a 1.2-kilometer beast of tungsten armor and magnetic accelerators that had earned its name in 3 border conflicts. On the view screen, the Corvith station burned. Atmosphere vented from a dozen hull breaches, glittering ice crystals in the black. The attackers, raiders from the scattered Krenvic clans, according to the database. Moved with practiced efficiency, their corvettes darting in to strip mining equipment while their frigates kept the station's defense platform suppressed. "Tactical assessment," Lieutenant Chen, Okonkwo ordered. Lieutenant Sarah Chen pulled up the analysis. 18 hostiles confirmed. Mix of Krenvic corvettes and frigates, probable tonnage between 40,000 and 90,000 tons each. They're using standard plasma batteries and kinetic slugs. Station defenses are at 40%, maybe less. The Corvith have 3 patrol boats trying to respond, but they're outgunned. We're looking at total station loss in under 2 hours. And the Retribution? Chen's expression didn't change, but her eyes gleamed. "We outmassed their entire raiding fleet by a factor of 4. Current weapons range is 220,000 kilometers and closing." Okonkwo nodded slowly, considering. The Krenvic were known opportunists, hitting soft targets in the outer territories where Galactic Council response times measured in weeks. They weren't expecting interference, and certainly not from humanity. Most species had heard of Earth by now, the newcomers from the Death World who'd somehow survived their own toxic hell of a planet. But few had seen human warships in action. "Hail the raiders," Okonkwo commanded. "Standard warning. They have 1 chance to withdraw." Torres worked her board. Moments later, a Krenvic face filled the secondary screen, reptilian, with overlapping scale plates and eyes like polished obsidian. The raider captain's translator rendered his words in flat, mechanical tones. "Unknown vessel, this is Krenvic Clan Captain Threz. You are interfering in legitimate salvage operations. Withdraw or be destroyed." Admiral Marcus Okonkwo, Terran Coalition Spaceship Retribution. "These aren't salvage operations, Captain. This is an active distress call. You have 60 seconds to break off your attack and leave the system." Threz's jaw plate spread in what the database identified as amusement. The Corvith called for rescue, human. 1 primitive warship does not constitute rescue. It constitutes target practice. The screen went dark. "Well," Okonkwo said mildly, "we tried." "Sir, the Corvith station is hailing us again," Torres reported. "War Marshal Vekroth is demanding we withdraw immediately. He says, quote, we asked for assistance, not provocation. Your presence will only escalate the situation." Okonkwo had read the Corvith cultural files during the 6-day burn to this system. They were an old species, established, with territory spanning 40 star systems. They preferred negotiation to conflict, trade to warfare. Their ships were built for commerce and mining, not battle. When the Krenvic had hit this remote outpost, the Corvith had done what they always did, called for help and hoped someone would broker a peaceful resolution. They'd assumed humanity would send mediators or maybe a relief ship. They definitely hadn't expected the retribution. "Tell the War Marshal we appreciate his concern," Okonkwo replied. "And tell him to get his people away from the outer hull sections. This is going to get loud." The Krenvic fleet accelerated, moving to intercept. 18 ships against 1, and they clearly liked their odds. Okonkwo watched them come, reading their formation. Classic raider tactics. Spread wide, maximize firing angles, overwhelm the target with volume of fire. It worked well against merchants and underarmed patrol craft. It wouldn't work against the retribution. "All hands, battle stations," Okonkwo announced calmly. "Tactical, bring the railguns online. Engineering, I want reactors at 100%. Helm, take us in at flank speed." The ship thrummed as systems spun up. In the engineering deck 6 levels below, Pavel Dimitrov watched his readouts climb into the red, fusion reactors pumping enough power to light up a small city. Throughout the hull, automated systems locked down bulkheads and pressurized combat compartments. The Retribution had been built in high orbit above Luna, constructed by a species that had learned the hard way that the universe didn't reward weakness. Range to targets, 180,000 kilometers, Chen reported. Their plasma batteries have effective range of approximately 90,000. Our Mark 9 railguns have effective range of 250,000 kilometers, Okonkwo finished. "I'm aware, Lieutenant. Let's educate our friends about human weapon doctrine. Target the lead frigate. Single shot. Let's see how good their shields are." The Retribution's railgun fired with an electromagnetic pulse that rippled across the hull. A tungsten carbide slug the size of a small car accelerated down the length of the ship's spine, magnetic coils throwing it forward at 12,000 kilometers per second. It crossed 180,000 kilometers in 15 seconds. The Krenvic frigate's shields lit up, a shimmering energy envelope designed to disperse plasma and absorb laser fire. Against the railgun slug, they lasted exactly 0.3 seconds before catastrophic failure. The projectile punched through the frigate's midsection, the kinetic impact turning internal compartments into superheated plasma. The ship broke in half, reactors going critical, pieces tumbling away in different vectors. "Direct hit," Chen reported, her voice professionally neutral. "Target destroyed. Remaining Krenvic vessels are, they're breaking formation, sir." On the view screen, the raider fleet scattered like startled fish. Okonkwo had seen this before, the moment when an enemy realized they'd made a fundamental miscalculation. The Krenvic had shields designed for energy weapons, armor built to resist explosive warheads. Humanity had started its weapons development with chemical propellants and kinetic energy. When they'd reached the stars, they'd simply scaled up. "They're reforming at 300,000 kilometers, Chen continued. "Looks like they're trying to figure out what just happened." "Let them wonder," Okonkwo said. He opened a channel to the Corvith station. "War Marshal Vekroth, this is Admiral Okonkwo. I strongly suggest you evacuate non-essential personnel to your inner compartments. The raiders are about to learn an expensive lesson." The Corvith commander's voice crackled with barely suppressed panic. "Admiral, you just destroyed a vessel in Galactic Council space without attempting diplomacy. The regulations clearly state. With respect, War Marshal, they opened fire on a civilian station. That makes this a combat situation, and combat has its own regulations." Okonkwo kept his voice level, almost conversational. "The kind we've been teaching each other on Earth for the last 5,000 years. There was a long pause. When Vekroth spoke again, his tone had shifted from panic to something else, a creeping realization, perhaps. "How many ships did you bring, Admiral?" "Just the one." "Against 18 raiders? That's... Admiral, that's suicide." "No, War Marshal," Okonkwo replied, pulling up the tactical overview. The Krenvik were regrouping, likely calling for reinforcements, adjusting their strategy. They still thought they could win this. That's Tuesday. The Krenvik fleet moved in again, but this time with more caution. They'd seen one ship die and wanted to understand the threat before committing. Smart, but it wouldn't save them. Okonkwo watched them split into 3 groups, a flanking maneuver, designed to force the Retribution to divide its fire. "Sir, they're launching fighters," Chen announced. "Count 36 light attack craft, closing fast. They'll be in missile range in 4 minutes. Okonkwo considered the board. Fighters were dangerous, too small for railguns to track effectively, fast enough to evade most capital ship weapons. Most species used point defense lasers to handle them, but lasers had relatively short range and limited firing cycles. The Krenvik were gambling that the Retribution's point defense couldn't handle 36 simultaneous threats. "Mr. Dimitrov," Okonkwo said into his comm, "how are those new flak cannons testing?" The engineer's Russian accent crackled through. "Beautiful, Admiral. Like my grandmother's pierogies, perfect recipe, just needed the right oven." "Excellent. Lieutenant Chen, let's introduce the Krenvik to fragmentation theory. Load proximity shells, set detonation for 5,000-meter spacing. I want a wall of shrapnel at 40,000 kilometers." The Retribution's close-in weapon systems had been upgraded at Luna Station 3 months ago. Instead of tracking individual fighters with energy weapons, humanity had gone back to a simpler principle. Fill the space around your ship with fast-moving metal and let the enemy fly into it. The flak cannons began firing, each shell programmed to explode at precise intervals, creating overlapping fields of tungsten fragments moving at hypersonic speeds. The Krenvik fighters hit the defensive screen at full acceleration. 23 died in the first salvo, their light armor shredded by hundreds of impacts. The survivors tried to evade, breaking formation, but the Retribution's tactical computer had already calculated their vectors. A second volley caught 9 more. 4 made it through, launching missiles that the point defense lasers eliminated at 8,000 kilometers. "Fighter strike neutralized," Chen reported. "The main fleet is pulling back to 400,000 kilometers. There. Admiral, they're not running. They're repositioning." Okonkwo leaned forward, studying the display. The Krenvik weren't fleeing, they were adapting. Whoever commanded that fleet had just watched humanity casually eliminate a third of their strike craft and was drawing conclusions. Dangerous conclusions. "They're calling for backup," Okonkwo said quietly. "Torres, scan for hyperspace signatures. I want to know the moment anything else drops into this system." "Aye, sir. But Admiral, if they bring in capital ships, then we'll educate them too." Okonkwo pulled up the weapons manifest. The Retribution carried enough ordnance to prosecute a month-long campaign. They'd used perhaps 2% of their ammunition. The Krenvik have raided soft targets for so long they've forgotten what real war looks like. Time we reminded them. On the view screen, the Corvith station continued to burn, but the immediate assault had stopped. The raiders were regrouping, reassessing. In the Retribution CIC, crew members worked their stations with practiced efficiency. This was what they'd trained for, not exploration, not diplomacy, but the brutal calculus of survival against a hostile galaxy. "Sir, hyperspace signatures detected," Torres announced, her voice tight. "Multiple contacts. 15, no, 20 vessels translating in. Designation, Krenvik heavy cruisers. Mass readings between 200,000 and 300,000 tons." Chen pulled up the new tactical display. "Admiral, they just tripled their firepower. We're looking at 38 hostile vessels total." Okonkwo sat back in his chair, fingers steepled. The Corvith had sent an SOS expecting rescue. They'd gotten humanity's answer. One ship, against an entire raiding fleet that was now being reinforced. By any conventional calculation, the Retribution was hopelessly outnumbered. But humanity hadn't survived its death world by accepting conventional calculations. Lieutenant Chen, Okonkwo said calmly, "Activate Fire Plan Delta. Mr. Dimitrov, I'm going to need everything the reactors can give us. And someone get me a damage assessment on that station. If we're going to save these people, I'd like to know what we're saving." The Krenvik heavy cruisers moved into formation with the surviving raiders, creating a battle line that stretched across 200,000 kilometers of space. 38 ships against 1. On paper, it wasn't even a fight. Okonkwo smiled. He'd read the reports from humanity's first contact wars, studied the tactical analyses. Every species in the galaxy had made the same mistake: they'd seen one world, one system, and assumed they understood. They saw the treaties, the trade agreements, the diplomatic corps, and thought humans were just another civilized species. They never asked why every human ship was a warship. They never questioned why Earth's orbital space looked like a fortress. They never wondered what kind of species builds weapons first and asks questions later. The Krenvik were about to learn. "New contacts on approach vector," Torres called out. "Designating Alpha through Tango. They're forming up for a massed assault." The enemy fleet began its acceleration burn, moving to engagement range. Okonkwo watched them come, counting vectors, calculating firing solutions. Somewhere on one of those cruisers, a Krenvik admiral was making plans, issuing orders, confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. "All weapons free," Okonkwo commanded. "Let's show them what the Retribution was built for." The battle line closed to 200,000 kilometers. Then 150,000. The Krenvik opened fire first, a wall of plasma bolts and kinetic slugs that lit up the void between the fleets. The Retribution's shields flared, absorbing and deflecting, but Okonkwo had already committed to his next move. "Helm, full acceleration. Take us straight down their throat. All railguns, rolling barrage. I want continuous fire." He paused as the weapons system synchronized, dozens of targeting solutions cascading across his display. The Krenvik fleet stretched before them, confident in their numbers, certain of their victory. Okonkwo's smile widened. "Until there's nothing left to shoot at." The Retribution's 8 railguns fired in sequence, a rolling thunder that sent magnetic pulses cascading through the hull. Tungsten carbide slugs tore across the void at 12% lightspeed, crossing 150,000 kilometers in seconds. The Krenvik heavy cruisers returned fire, plasma batteries lighting up space with coherent energy streams, but their targeting solutions were calculated for conventional ship-to-ship combat. Matched velocities, predictable vectors, ships that fought at safe distances. Okonkwo had thrown the manual away the moment the enemy appeared. The first 3 railgun rounds struck home before the Krenvik could adjust. A heavy cruiser took a slug through its forward section, the impact vaporizing 200 meters of hull and sending the ship into an uncontrolled spin. Another round grazed a corvette, shearing off weapons pods and leaving the vessel tumbling. The third penetrated a frigate's reactor compartment. The fusion bottle failed spectacularly, turning the ship into a brief star. "Target Alpha 7 destroyed, Alpha 3 crippled, Alpha 12 disabled," Chen called out, her fingers dancing across tactical. "Remaining vessels breaking formation. Admiral, they're trying to spread out, deny us concentrated targets." "Then we'll take them one at a time," Okonkwo replied. "Helm, attack pattern Sierra. Get us inside their formation. Make them choose between hitting us or hitting each other." The Retribution dove into the enemy fleet like a shark into a school of fish. At 400,000 tons and over a kilometer long, she was a monster compared to the Krenvik vessels, but her fusion drives pushed her forward with brutal acceleration. The enemy scattered, trying to maintain firing solutions without crossing each other's fields of fire. Aboard the Krenvik flagship Razorclaw, Fleet Master Gresh stared at his tactical display in growing disbelief. He'd brought 20 heavy cruisers to crush a single human warship, a show of overwhelming force that should have ended in minutes. Instead, he'd watched 4 of his ships die in the opening salvo, and now the human vessel was accelerating directly toward his battle line. "All batteries, concentrate fire on the human ship," Gresh ordered, his claws clicking against his command throne. "Fighters, attack, run on their engines. Disable their propulsion and—" "Fleet Master," his sensor operator interrupted. "The human ship is launching something. Multiple objects, small signature, spreading pattern." Gresh magnified the display. Dozens of small objects had separated from the Retribution's hull, drifting outward in expanding spheres. They weren't missiles, no drive signatures, no warheads. Just inert metal. "What are those?" he demanded. The answer came 30 seconds later when a Krenvik corvette strayed into the debris field. The captain never saw the fist-sized sphere of condensed metal until it impacted his ship's starboard side at 40,000 km per second relative velocity. The kinetic energy release was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The corvette simply ceased to exist, blown apart by physics and momentum. "Mines," Gresh whispered. "They seeded space with kinetic mines." "Not mines, Fleet Master," his tactical officer corrected, voice shaking. "Just debris. Scrap metal ejected from their ship. We're running into it at combat speed." It was brilliant in its simplicity. The Retribution had been dumping mass, spent railgun casings, broken components, anything with weight, setting it adrift in carefully calculated vectors. The Krenvik fleet, maneuvering at high speed, was flying through a cloud of relativistic shrapnel. 2 more ships died in quick succession, their shields useless against solid matter moving at combat velocities. "Fall back," Gresh commanded. "Reform at 500,000 kilometers, outside their debris field." Aboard the Retribution, Okonkwo watched the enemy retreat and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. That's twice now they've had to rethink their approach. "Lieutenant Chen, what's our ammunition status?" "Railguns at 86%. Flak cannons at 92%. Missile tubes fully loaded but not yet deployed. We've used less than 15% of our kinetic ordnance." "Good. Keep the missiles in reserve. I want to see what else they bring to the party before we show all our cards." Okonkwo opened a channel to engineering. "Mr. Dimitrov, damage report. Minor hull scoring from plasma fire, Admiral. Shields absorbed most of it. One coolant line ruptured on deck 9, but we've already rerouted. We can keep this up for days." Days. The Krenvik had brought enough firepower to level a planetary defense grid, and the Retribution could sustain this tempo for days. Okonkwo switched his display to the Corvith station. War Marshal Vekroth's face appeared, his features twisted in an expression the database labeled as profound shock. "Admiral," Vekroth began slowly, "you have destroyed 9 enemy vessels in 11 minutes. 9. With 1 ship. Closer to 12 when you count the crippled ones," Okonkwo corrected. "They won't be fighting again anytime soon. How is this possible? Your weapons, your tactics." The Galactic Council's records indicate humanity only achieved spaceflight 30 years ago. You are. Primitives? Okonkwo offered. "War Marshal, we've been killing each other efficiently for 5,000 years. We just recently started doing it in space. The principles don't change." Vekroth's translator struggled with what might have been a bitter laugh. "The Council worried you were too aggressive. Too warlike. I told them they were being paranoid. I see now I was wrong. War Marshal, with respect, you asked for help. This is what human help looks like." The transmission cut off as Torres called out a warning. "Admiral, new contacts." Multiple hyperspace signatures, Fleet Master Gresh is calling in reinforcements. Count, 30 vessels, heavy configuration. They're translating in at 800,000 kilometers, designated Bravo Group. Okonkwo studied the new contacts. The Krenvik weren't giving up, they were doubling down, throwing more ships at the problem. Classic doctrine for a species that relied on numerical superiority. Against most opponents, it worked. Helm, maintain course. Tactical, I want targeting solutions on the Bravo Group the moment they finish translation. And someone tell me when those 30 ships become 20. Chen glanced at him. Sir? They're going to lose 10% of their fleet just getting organized, Okonkwo explained calmly. Watch. The Krenvik reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace in a tight formation. Textbook military doctrine, ships close enough for mutual support, far enough to avoid collision. What they hadn't accounted for was the retribution sensor suite. Humanity had spent decades watching alien traffic patterns, studying engagement ranges, analyzing weapon signatures. Chen had firing solutions locked before the enemy ships finished spooling down their hyperdrives. Fire, Okonkwo ordered. 8 railguns spoke as one. 8 tungsten slugs crossed 800,000 kilometers in just over a minute. The Krenvik were still running post-translation diagnostics when the rounds arrived. 3 ships died outright, reactors breached, hulls split. A 4th took a grazing hit that severed its keel, breaking the vessel's structural integrity. It began tearing itself apart under its own thrust. 4 confirmed kills, Chen reported. The rest are scattering, breaking formation. Gresh watched from the razor claw as his reinforcements fell apart. The human ship had fired from beyond maximum engagement range, distances where most species considered combat impossible, and scored direct hits on vessels that had just emerged from hyperspace. The targeting alone required computational power that shouldn't exist on a ship that size, and the weapons. How far can they shoot? He asked his tactical officer. Unknown, Fleet Master. They engaged at 800,000 kilometers. Our longest-range batteries max out at 120,000. Gresh's claws dug into his throne's armrest. The humans had a 7-to-1 range advantage. They could kill his ships while his fleet couldn't even fire back. And that didn't account for their other capabilities. The kinetic debris fields, the point defense systems that shredded fighter craft, the armor that shrugged off plasma fire designed to melt battleship hulls. We need to close the distance, he decided. Mass acceleration burn. All ships, full thrust. Get inside 100,000 kilometers and overwhelm them with volume of fire. It was a desperate tactic, but desperation was all he had left. 64 ships, what remained of his combined force. Lit their drives and accelerated toward the retribution at maximum burn. If they could get close enough, fast enough, their superior numbers would tell. Even the humans couldn't target 60 ships simultaneously. Okonkwo watched the enemy fleet commit to its charge. They're going all in. Brave. Stupid, but brave. Orders, Admiral? Chen asked. Prepare countermeasures. Load sabot rounds in guns 3 and 6, standard penetrators in the others. Activate electronic warfare suite. Let's see how well they fight blind. And someone get the missile batteries ready. I think it's time we stopped being subtle. The Retribution's EW systems came online, flooding subspace with carefully crafted interference patterns. Across the Krenvik fleet, targeting computers went haywire, communications links filled with static, sensor arrays returned gibberish. Ships that had been coordinating their attack vectors suddenly found themselves operating in isolation, unable to share data or maintain formation. They're still coming, Torres reported. Closing to 400,000 kilometers. They can't target worth a damn, but they're not breaking off. Credit where it's due, they've got courage, Okonkwo acknowledged. Helm, bring us about. Let's give them a broadside. The Retribution rotated on her axis, presenting her port side to the oncoming fleet. Hidden weapons ports opened along her hull, revealing launch tubes that had remained concealed throughout the engagement. 48 missile tubes, each loaded with a Mark 12 ship killer carrying a 200 megaton fusion warhead. Missiles away, Chen announced. 48 contrails lanced through the void, each missile accelerating at 500 gravities, their onboard AI systems coordinating attack vectors. The Krenvik point defense systems tried to engage, but between the EW jamming and the missile's maneuvering capabilities, only 6 were intercepted. The remaining 42 found targets. The fusion warheads detonated in a rolling wave of nuclear fire. Ships vanished in balls of expanding plasma, their shields overwhelmed, their armor vaporized. Gresh watched in horror as 17 vessels died in 30 seconds, not from kinetic impacts or energy weapons, but from weapons he'd thought were ancient history. Nuclear devices. Primitive, brutal, and devastatingly effective. Fleet Master, we've lost over half our strength, his tactical officer reported, voice breaking. Casualty estimates at 12,000. The humans they're not even damaged. Shields at full strength, all weapons operational. Gresh stared at his tactical display. He'd brought what should have been overwhelming force to crush a single ship. Instead, he'd watched that ship systematically dismantle his fleet using tactics and weapons that defied every conventional understanding of space combat. The humans fought at impossible ranges, used debris as weapons, jammed communications, and weren't above using fusion warheads in direct ship-to-ship engagement. Sir, incoming transmission from the human ship, his communications officer said quietly. Okonkwo's face appeared on Gresh's view screen. The human admiral looked utterly calm, almost bored. Fleet Master Gresh, I'm told that's your name. You've lost 47 ships in 26 minutes. I'm prepared to accept your surrender and allow your remaining vessels to withdraw peacefully. You call this peaceful? Gresh snarled. You've slaughtered thousands of my warriors. You attacked a civilian station, Okonkwo replied, his voice hardening. You ignored a lawful order to withdraw. And when we defended that station, you called in reinforcements and tried to destroy us. Every death on your ships is a direct result of your decisions, Fleet Master. But those decisions can end right now. Surrender, or I will continue removing your vessels from space until there's nothing left. Gresh looked at his remaining forces. 17 ships, most damaged, crews demoralized, systems degraded from the EW assault. The human ship hung in space before him, pristine and deadly, having barely used a fraction of its capabilities. He thought of the legends he'd heard, whispers about humanity's home world, about the wars they'd fought against each other, about a species that had clawed its way out of a gravity well nearly twice standard and built weapons to match. Why? He asked quietly. Why did you come? The Corvith are nothing to you. This system means nothing to your species. Why risk your ship for strangers? Okonkwo was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Gresh couldn't quite identify. Because they called for help, and we answered. That's what civilized species do. The real question, Fleet Master, is what you're going to do next. Gresh looked at his tactical officer, at the faces of his bridge crew. Young warriors who'd thought this would be a simple raid, that the stories about human aggression were exaggerated. They'd learned the truth. The question was whether they'd survive the lesson. We surrender, Gresh said, the words bitter but necessary. My fleet will withdraw immediately. Smart choice. Okonkwo nodded. Here's what happens next. You're going to repair the damage to that station. Every breach you caused, every system you damaged, you fix. Then you're going to leave this system and not come back. And Fleet Master? Tell whoever sent you that Corvith space is now under Terran protection. Test that protection at your peril. The transmission ended. Gresh sat in his command throne, staring at the view screen, trying to process what had just happened. He'd brought 68 ships against one and lost. Not through some technological miracle or unexpected advantage, but through simple, brutal, efficient violence. The humans had known exactly what they were doing from the first shot to the last. Aboard the Retribution, Okonkwo leaned back in his chair. Secure from battle stations. Tactical, keep tracking those Krenvic ships until they're out of sensor range. Torres, notify Fleet Command, mission successful, minimal damage sustained. Admiral, Chen said carefully, the Krenvic still have 17 ships out there. If they regroup, if they decide to. They won't, Okonkwo interrupted. We didn't just beat them, Lieutenant. We broke them. They came here thinking humans were soft targets, another species to bully. Now they know better. He pulled up the tactical display, studying the wreckage of destroyed ships floating among the debris. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is teach a lesson so thoroughly it never needs to be repeated. But even as he said it, Okonkwo's tactical board lit up with a new alert. A hyperspace signature, massive, unlike anything the Krenvic had brought. Torres pulled up the data, her face going pale. Admiral, that's not a Krenvic signature. It's... Sir, that's a Galactic Council enforcement fleet. 6 capital ships, 12 escorts, translating in at our position. Okonkwo sat forward, studying the new arrivals. The Council had heard about the battle. And now, with dozens of wrecked ships and thousands of casualties floating in space, they were coming to see what humanity had done. The Council fleet materialized in a precise formation, 6 heavy cruisers flanked by escort frigates, their hulls gleaming with the white and gold markings of Galactic peacekeeping forces. Okonkwo recognized the lead ship from the database, the Arbitrator's Resolve, flagship of Enforcer Prime Kalesh, a Viridian who'd spent 2 centuries maintaining Council law across 70 systems. Incoming transmission, Torres announced. It's the Enforcer Prime. He's... Admiral, he's ordering us to stand down and prepare for boarding. Okonkwo's expression didn't change. Tell the Enforcer Prime that the TCS Retribution is a sovereign Terran vessel operating under lawful authority. We will not be boarded. Torres hesitated. Sir, Council Enforcement Authority supersedes. Tell him, Ensign. The transmission went out. 30 seconds of silence followed before Kalesh's face appeared on screen. Angular features, skin like burnished copper, eyes that had witnessed centuries of galactic politics. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of assumed authority. Admiral Okonkwo, I have reviewed preliminary combat logs. You have destroyed 47 vessels in Council space, inflicted approximately 15,000 casualties, and deployed nuclear weapons in a civilian sector. These actions constitute grave violations of Enforcer Prime, Okonkwo interrupted calmly, with respect, you need to review those logs more carefully. The Krenvic attacked a civilian station broadcasting a distress signal. We responded to that distress call. When the raiders refused to withdraw and instead reinforced their attack, we defended ourselves and the station. Everything we did falls under lawful self-defense protocols. Kalesh's eyes narrowed. Self-defense does not justify the use of fusion warheads in. The Council banned fusion weapons for planetary bombardment, Okonkwo cut in again. Not ship-to-ship combat. We checked. He leaned forward slightly. Enforcer Prime, we're happy to cooperate with any investigation. But we will not be boarded, we will not stand down, and we will not be treated as criminals for defending innocent civilians. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you file a formal complaint. The channel went silent. On the Arbitrator's Resolve, Kalesh stared at the human admiral with something approaching disbelief. In 200 years of enforcement operations, he'd never had a species refuse his authority so casually. The humans acted as if council jurisdiction was optional, as if 6 capital ships pointing weapons at them was merely an inconvenience. Enforcer Prime, his tactical officer said quietly, "I've finished analyzing the wreckage field." The humans engaged at ranges exceeding 800,000 kilometers. Their kinetic weapons penetrate standard shielding like it doesn't exist. And sir, they used less than 20% of their ammunition. Kalesh studied the tactical data. The Krenvik had brought 68 ships. The humans had brought 1. And that one ship had systematically dismantled a force that should have overwhelmed it through sheer numerical superiority. More disturbing were the tactics: debris fields used as weapons, electronic warfare that blinded sensors, fusion warheads deployed without hesitation, and railguns that struck from distances the Council considered safe. "Scan their vessel," Kalesh ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The results came back in moments. His sensor operator's voice shook slightly. "Enforcer Prime, that ship masses 400,000 tons and reads as 92% weapon systems and armor. Their power signature indicates fusion reactors capable of sustained combat operations for weeks. Weapons inventory includes at least 300 kinetic launchers, multiple missile batteries, point defense grids, and electronic warfare suites more sophisticated than our own." "Sir, that's not a warship. It's a mobile weapons platform." Kalesh felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine uncertainty. The humans had been in space for 30 years. 30 years, and they'd built vessels that made Council enforcement ships look like patrol boats. What kind of species prioritized weapons development to that degree? The answer came from his database officer. "Sir, I've pulled Earth's file. It's..." "Enforcer Prime, you need to see this." Kalesh scanned the data. Earth, gravity 1. 3 standard. Atmospheric pressure at sea level, 1.4 standard. Solar radiation, 1.2 standard. Tectonic activity, extreme. Weather patterns, violent. Native predator count, off scale. Classification, Death World, Omega class. Recommended approach, extreme caution. The file went on. Humans were persistence predators evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill its own inhabitants. They'd fought wars against each other for their entire recorded history. 5,000 years of continuous conflict that had refined their understanding of violence to an art form. They'd split the atom and immediately weaponized it. They'd reached space and immediately militarized it. Every aspect of their society showed the same pattern: prepare for the worst, trust no one, and never be caught defenseless. "They're from a death world," Kalesh said slowly. "A real one?" "Yes, sir." The Council First Contact Team noted it in their report. Recommendation was to proceed with diplomatic caution and avoid military confrontation. The database officer paused. The Krenvik apparently didn't read that part. Kalesh looked at the Retribution, hanging in space like a predator at rest. The ship hadn't moved, hadn't powered up weapons, hadn't done anything overtly threatening. It simply existed, radiating the promise of violence to anything foolish enough to provoke it. And behind that ship was an entire species that thought this level of militarization was normal. "Open a channel to Admiral Okonkwo," Kalesh ordered. When the human appeared, he chose his words carefully. "Admiral, I may have been premature in my assessment. After reviewing the full combat logs and the Krenvik attack patterns, it's clear you acted in accordance with defense protocols. However, the Council will need to conduct a formal inquiry regarding the use of fusion weapons." "We'll cooperate fully with any inquiry," Okonkwo replied. "As long as it's conducted through proper diplomatic channels and doesn't involve boarding my ship." Kalesh nodded slowly. "Acceptable. I will recommend to the Council that humanity's response was proportionate given the circumstances." He paused, studying the human. "Admiral, May I ask a question off the record? Go ahead. How many ships like the Retribution does Earth have? Okonkwo smiled thinly. Enough, Enforcer Prime. We have enough. The transmission ended. Kalesh sat in his command chair, processing what he'd just witnessed. The Council had spent centuries maintaining peace through shows of force and diplomatic pressure. They'd never encountered a species that could casually dismiss that pressure because they knew, absolutely knew, that they could win any fight that followed. Sir, the Krenvik fleet is requesting permission to withdraw, his communications officer reported. Granted. Get them out of this system before they do something else stupid. Kalesh pulled up a secure channel to Council headquarters. This report would take careful wording. The Council needed to understand what humanity represented, not as a threat necessarily, but as a power that would not be bullied or controlled. Aboard the Razorclaw, Fleet Master Gresh watched the Council fleet maintain position while his battered ships limped toward the hyperspace jump point. 17 vessels remained from the 68 he'd brought. 17, and every one of them damaged, crews traumatized, systems degraded. The humans had done this. One ship, one crew, and they'd crushed his fleet like an afterthought. Fleet Master, his communications officer said quietly, intercepted Council transmission. They're backing down. The humans refuse to stand down, and the Council is backing down. Gresh wasn't surprised. He'd watched the Retribution fight. Any species crazy enough to charge into 68 enemy ships and win wasn't going to surrender to a diplomatic enforcement action. And the Council was smart enough to recognize a fight they couldn't win. Send a message to clan leadership, Gresh ordered, his voice heavy. Full report on human capabilities. Mark Sol system as restricted territory. Omega level threat. Any clan caught raiding near human space will answer to me personally. Fleet Master, the clans won't. They will, Gresh interrupted. Because I'm going to make sure every warrior in the Krenvik nation sees the combat footage. Let them watch what happens when you underestimate humans. Let them watch their ships die. Maybe then they'll understand. He looked at the tactical display, at the wreckage of his fleet floating in the dark. We picked a fight with predators who've been perfecting violence for 5,000 years. We're lucky any of us survived to pass the lesson on. On the Corvith station, War Marshal Vekroth stared at the damage reports with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the station had survived, horror at the cost paid in Krenvik blood. The humans had saved his people, yes, but the casual brutality of their methods left him shaken. War Marshal, his aide reported, Admiral Okonkwo is hailing us. Vekroth accepted the transmission. The human admiral looked exactly as calm as he had before the battle, as if destroying 47 ships was routine business. War Marshal, the Krenvik are withdrawing and the Council has agreed to a formal inquiry. Your station is secure. We'll maintain position until your repair crews can restore primary systems. Admiral, thank you. You saved thousands of lives today. But those methods, that level of violence. War Marshal, you sent a distress call. We answered it. If you wanted someone to negotiate with the Krenvik, you should have called diplomats. You called for rescue, and this is what human rescue looks like. Okonkwo's expression softened slightly. I understand this is difficult to process. But your people are safe. That's what matters. Vekroth nodded slowly. The Corvith government will remember this, Admiral. We will remember what humanity did for us. Just spread the word, Okonkwo replied. Let the galaxy know that when someone calls for help, humanity answers. And let them know what happens to anyone who attacks those under our protection. The transmission ended. Vekroth looked out at the Retribution, at the sleek predatory lines of a ship built for one purpose. The galaxy was going to have to adjust its understanding of humanity, and quickly. The newcomers weren't primitives to be dismissed or threats to be contained. They were something far more dangerous, protectors with the capability and will to back up their promises with overwhelming force. Across the system, other ships had been watching. Trading vessels, scout ships, monitoring drones from a dozen different species. They'd all witnessed the battle, watched one human warship dismantle a Krenvic raiding fleet and stare down a Council enforcement squadron without flinching. The recordings would spread through galactic networks within hours. In her quarters aboard a Miralex trade vessel, Captain Shilaris marked Earth's coordinates with a warning flag. Her species had survived 10,000 years of galactic commerce by knowing when to avoid trouble. Sol system would be avoided. The humans had just announced their presence in the most dramatic way possible, and smart species would take the hint. Aboard the Retribution, the crew secured from battle stations. Engineering teams began repairs on minor damage. Tactical officers compiled after-action reports. In the CIC, Okonkwo reviewed the final casualty counts: 0 human losses, 47 enemy vessels destroyed, thousands of Krenvic dead. Admiral, Chen said quietly, the Krenvic never stood a chance, did they? Okonkwo considered the question. No, Lieutenant. They didn't. But they forced the fight. We gave them every opportunity to withdraw peacefully. They chose violence, and violence is something humanity understands extremely well. Do you think the Council will make trouble for us? They'll bluster, file reports, maybe impose some minor sanctions. But they won't push too hard. They've seen what we can do. Okonkwo pulled up the tactical display, studying the wreckage field one last time. The galaxy is going to have to accept that humanity isn't going away, and we're not going to be anyone's victim. We spent too long fighting each other to let aliens push us around. Torres looked up from her station. Admiral, incoming message from Fleet Command. They're congratulating us on a successful first contact operation. First contact operation, Okonkwo repeated, a trace of dark humor in his voice. Is that what we're calling it? He stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for hours. Log it in the official report, Ensign. Humanity's first major military engagement in Council space. Duration, 26 minutes. Result, decisive victory. Casualties, 0. Send that back to Fleet Command with my compliments. He walked to the forward viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Krenvic were fleeing. The Council was reassessing. Dozens of species were updating their threat analyses, marking Sol system with new classifications, drawing new conclusions about humanity's place in the galaxy. Good. Let them draw conclusions. Let them update their databases and adjust their strategies. Let them understand that Earth had joined the galactic community on its own terms, armed and ready, prepared to defend not just humanity but anyone who called for help. The Corvith had sent an SOS. Humanity had answered with its deadliest warship. And the galaxy would never forget the lesson written in wreckage and fire across this distant system. Okonkwo allowed himself a small smile. The mission was accomplished. The station was saved. And humanity's reputation was established beyond any doubt. The message would spread through the stars: Earth doesn't start fights. But they damn sure finish them.